Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajak Acharya Shotara Siddha Shishimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajak Acharya Shotara Siddha Shishimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Prem Se Gaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai All gloriously assembled devotees Hare Krishna All gloriously assembled devotees Hare Krishna All gloriously assembled devotees All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga All glories to Srila Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam Chapter 7, titled Further Inquiries by Vidura, text number 13. Yada indriya uparamaha ata drashtra atmani pare haro viliyante tada kleshaha samsuptasya iva kritsnashaha yadendriyo paramota yadendriyo paramota drashtratmani pareharo drastratmani pareharo viliyante tada kleshaha viliyante tada kleshaha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha yadendriyo paramota drashtratmani pareharo viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha. Please chant. Yadendriyo paramota drastratmani pareharo viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha yadendriyo paramota drashtratmani hare paro viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha yadendriyo paramota drastratmani pareharo viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha yadendriyo paramota drastratmani pareharo viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha yadendriyo paramota drastratmani pareharo viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha. Mataji's. Yadendriyo paramota drastratmani pareharo viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha yadendriyo paramota drastratmani pareharo viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha yada when indriya senses uparamaha satiated ata thus drastra atmani unto the seer, the supersoul. Pare, in the transcendence. Haro, unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Viliyante, become merged in. Tada, at that time. Kleshaha, miseries. Samsuptasya, one who has enjoyed sound sleep. Iva, like. Kritsnashaha, completely. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. When the senses are satisfied in the seer supersoul, the personality of Godhead, and merged in Him, all miseries are completely vanquished, as after a sound sleep. Purport. The quivering of the living entity, as described above, is due to the senses. Since the entire material existence is meant for sense gratification, the senses are the medium of material activities, and they cause the quivering of the steady soul. Therefore, these senses are to be detached from all such material activities. According to the impersonalists, the senses are stopped from working by merging the soul in the supersoul, Brahman. The devotees, however, do not stop the material senses from acting, but they engage their transcendental senses in the service of the transcendence, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In either case, the activities of the senses in the material field are to be stopped by the cultivation of knowledge, and if possible, they can be engaged in the service of the Lord. The senses are transcendental in nature, but their activities become polluted when contaminated by matter. We have to treat the senses to cure them of the material disease, not stop them from acting, as suggested by the impersonalist. In Bhagavad Gita 2:59, it is said that one seizes all material activities when one is satisfied by contact with a better engagement. Consciousness is active by nature and cannot be stopped from working. Artificially stopping a mischievous child is not the real remedy. The child must be given some better engagement so that he will automatically stop causing mischief. In the same way, the mischievous activities of the senses can be stopped only by better engagement in relation with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the eyes are engaged in seeing the beautiful form of the Lord, the tongue engaged in tasting prasad, or remnants of foodstuffs offered to the Lord, the ears are engaged in hearing His glories, the hands engaged in cleaning the temple of the Lord, the legs engaged in visiting His temples, or when all the senses are engaged in transcendental variegatedness, then only can the transcendental senses become satiated and eternally free from material engagement. The Lord, as the Supersoul residing in everyone's heart, and as the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the transcendental world, far beyond the material creation, is the seer of all our activities. Our activities must be so transcendentally saturated that the Lord will be kind enough to look upon us favorably and engage us in His transcendental service. Then only can the senses be satisfied completely and no longer troubled by material attraction. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utaf Parakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vansha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha namo om vishnu paraya krishna prishtaya bhutale shrimate bhakti vikasa swaminiti namine Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Yatendriyo paramota drastratmani pareharo viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha. When the senses are satisfied in the seer supersoul, the personality of Godhead, and merged in him, all miseries are completely vanquished, as after a sound sleep. This is a very important verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. While it might not be necessarily quoted so much or referenced very often, I mean, of course, all the verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam are important. But this verse establishes a very foundational understanding by which one needs to build their Krishna consciousness off of. And this is in answer to some of the questions that Vidura asks at the beginning of this chapter. This chapter is entitled Further Inquiries by Vidura. I don't know who's controlling the screen, but if you could go to the index for the chapter. I'm just going to quickly go over here. The question.
Next to the chapter. 3:7. Go to the chapter. No, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so starting with verse number 2, we can see here that Vidura here is asking about how the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the complete spiritual whole and is unchangeable. How is he connected with the material modes of nature and their activities? And how does he exhibit these qualities without the modes of nature? And then this inquiry sort of continues through the next couple of verses, talking about how boys here have the desire to play, but how the Lord, being completely self-satisfied, can't really have such desire. And going on to the next verse here, that the Lord is the cause of the modes of material nature, the cause of this universe, and he maintains, controls, and dissolves it. And that the pure soul, which is the essence of the soul being consciousness, needs to be engaged in some sort of activity. And he asks, then how does this soul become engaged in this ignorance and find himself in this material world? And why do the activities of the living entities result in their distress and result in their misfortune? So basically saying that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is in charge of everything, and he's completely self-satisfied, yet he created these living entities which are, they're conscious. They have a consciousness, which means they need to be engaged in some sort of activity. So he's asking then, why does it seem like these living entities which are engaged in activities only suffer such misfortune and misery? Why does it seem like these living entities in the material world, they're just suffering? Which is a very important question, which is relevant to all of us, because we see in this material world there's so much suffering, and pretty much everybody, they're going from happiness to distress. But here in this verse, it says that all one's miseries can be completely vanquished, as if after a sound sleep. So who here has had the experience of having a good rest or taking a really good nap? I think all of us can probably raise our hands, except maybe Amayama Prabhu. He doesn't really take naps. And Charandeep also, he takes naps for maybe like 10, 15 minutes. But we all have this experience, and I know Parameshwar Prabhu, he often gives the anecdote where if you're feeling really mental or your mind is feeling it's really going here and there, and you're thinking, oh, like, is this really what I should be doing? His go-to formula or his recommendation is to take a good nap. Because while your consciousness might be going here and there and everywhere, when you get good rest and when you can calm your mind and you can actually think from the platform of logic and knowledge, you'll be able to realize, oh yeah, what I was thinking about, it wasn't really such a big deal. And everything which was previously super turbulent, like a raging river or the waves of an ocean, it becomes very calm. And it becomes very nice. And from the platform of logic and understanding, one can come to the proper conclusion. So this analogy in this regard is very good because everybody, as is described here by Srila Prabhupada, the living entities, they're quivering, which is a very interesting use of words, but he contrasts it here with the steady soul. So the word quivering was also used in the previous purport to describe the qualities of material existence. And quivering, as we've all experienced, now it's very cold, so one often quivers, they shake, their bodies moving here and there, because by the movement of the body, warmth is created. But it describes our condition in this material world as being not very fixed, as the mind constantly going here to there. Right? We hear this phrase, the speed of mind, which is almost unfathomable because with our own mind, we can go here, there, and everywhere in fractions of a second. We can be thinking we're here in this temple room. We can be thinking of India. We can be thinking of some planetary system. We can be thinking of the heavenly planets. And our mind can go here and there and everywhere. And thus, this material mind is constantly quivering here and there and going from one thing to another. But we can see Srila Prabhupada is describing here that the actual nature of the living entity, which is the spirit soul, which is inside of this material body, its natural state is to be very steady, is to be very fixed. So why does this come about? As Vidura is asking, why is the living entity, which needs to be engaged in activity, why are his activities only bringing him suffering? And this is very easy for one to understand for one who has practical knowledge, but we can see for most people in the world, they're looking for answers to this question. They're looking in so many different places. Some people look for the answers through money. Some people look for the answers through relationships. Some people look through the answers through material things, material facilities. But ultimately, none of these things bring the soul real happiness. And this is because of the outlook by which one is seeing all these things. Because in the material world, we're constantly suffering because we're seeing ourselves as the enjoyer and seeing ourselves as the proprietor. We're thinking, I am the Lord of everything that I survey. We think that we're the main character in this material world. We think everything belongs to me, everything is for my personal enjoyment, and I should use this life for me to enjoy. And matter of fact, those who even believe in the existence of God or the existence of the Creator, most of them say, in fact, God gave me this world so I can enjoy. Right? God gave me these senses so I can enjoy. God gave me this body just so I can enjoy. And everything that I have around me is for my enjoyment. And God wants me to be happy, right? So he gave me all these things so I can be happy. But this question still doesn't get answered, right? Even if God gave us all these things for us to enjoy, then why, when we try to enjoy them, do we find misery? And do we find such dissatisfaction? Do we not find happiness? If this material creation, if all these material things were meant to make us happy, then why don't they make us happy? This philosophy doesn't actually come to the logical conclusion and doesn't answer this question posed here by Vidura. So the outlook that one has to see these things through is actually very revolutionary for those who are a materialist. in which it's saying that these material things, they aren't actually to make me happy, and they aren't for my enjoyment, but they're for the enjoyment of Krishna, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And everything is meant for the satisfaction, glorification, and enjoyment of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he's the supreme controller. Not only is he the supreme controller, but he's the supreme enjoyer. God actually has the capacity to enjoy all of these things, right? The soul is a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, meaning that the soul, it has some power to lord over material nature, which is why we can see we have the ability to manipulate matter to some extent, right? We have this material body, we can control what we do, right? We have all these different material things. We can use it to build a nice temple, we can use it to build a car, and this way we can manipulate material energy to some extent. But because we don't have the capacity to enjoy all these material things to their extent, it isn't in our nature to enjoy all these things. Mahotsa Prabhu, in his class yesterday, he said something very profound, where he said the most selfish thing is to actually selflessly serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because naturally, by serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all of our desires are naturally satiated. All of our desires are naturally satisfied. Because in this material world, we are trying to be the controller, we're trying to be the enjoyer, but so many things are out of our control. So many things are out of our jurisdiction. And this is actually what brings us so much unhappiness, is that we're trying to create a permanent position in a temporary world. We're trying to control all of our external situation, and when all of our hard work, all of our effort doesn't bring us that satisfaction, doesn't bring us that security that we were looking for, we get so dissatisfied. Why? Because we tried so hard, we put in so much effort, we did so much, but we're still dissatisfied, right? Like people, they go to school, they study for so many years, right? People think, okay, if I get a doctorate, then I'll be happy because I'll be able to make a lot of money. But in order to do that, they have to go through 10 years of school and college, and they have to do residency where they get paid less than the janitors that are working in the same hospital. And finally, when they get to make a lot of money, they have to work like an ass. They have to work 80 hours a week. And with all of their money, they find that all the things that money can buy, it doesn't make them happy, right? And this entire material situation that they're trying to create, this entire manifestation that they're trying to control, they can't control it because we aren't the controllers. In the Brahma Samhita, Lord Brahma describes Krishna as Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachit Ananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarvakara Nakaranam. You can pull up this verse here, 5.1. And it's described that Krishna, he's known as Govinda, and he's actually the supreme controller. He's the cause of all causes. And he has an eternally blissful spiritual body. And you can go here in this purport here, you can scroll down. There's one particular part that I'm looking for. You can keep scrolling here. You can keep going. Here we go. You can go up to where this sentence starts. His unrivaled or unique spiritual body of super excellent charm is eternally unveiled with innumerable spiritual instruments, senses, and unreckonable attributes, keeping their signifying location properly, adjusting at the same time his inconceivable conciliative powers. So it's really amazing here. This is Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's commentary, right? He describes these senses here as actually spiritual instruments. And we can see here that the senses are the medium for our material activities. Srila Prabhupada describes this here. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Yatato hyapi kaunteya purushasya vipashtitaha indriyani pramatini haranti prasabam manaha. That if you could pull up this verse too, it's 260. Krishna is describing that these material senses, or the senses when they're engaged in material activity, if you could go to the translation here, they only bring us, and they forcibly carry us away when we're endeavoring to control them. They constantly bring us here and there. So when these senses, they're engaged in the material activity, they constantly take us here and there because we're looking for the proper engagement for the senses, because the soul which is pervading the body, as I described, being conscious, and needs some activity and needs some engagement. But when one is just trying to engage the senses in the material activity, it keeps on wandering here and there, and it keeps on being dissatisfied. But as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur describes in that commentary, that the senses, they're actually spiritual instruments. The senses, they're meant for spiritual engagement, which is why it's described here that the only way to actually purify the senses, the only way to actually use the senses in the way which they're properly meant for, is to engage them in Krishna's service. I was recently listening to this class by Srila Prabhupada, where he was saying, Krishna's given us this material body where it's actually very easy for us to engage all of our senses in Krishna's service. We've been given very good eyes to be able to perceive the form of the Lord. We've been given very good ears, actually, by which we're able to hear spiritual subject matters. We've been given, hands with opposable thumbs, which we're very easily able to manipulate matter to engage it in Krishna's service. So we've actually been given a very good situation to fully engage this material body in Krishna consciousness. And why is this? Srila Prabhupada describes here in the purport that we have to treat the senses to cure them of the material disease, but not stop them from acting as suggested by the impersonalists. And this condition that we're in is described by our acharyas. The 6 Goswamis describe this as Syat Krishna Nama Charitadi Sitapte Vidya Pitopa Taptarasanasya Narochikanu Kintvadharad Anudinam Kalusaiva Jushta Svadvikramad Bhavati Tad Gadamula Hantri. That because we're engaging these senses in this material activity, we've become sick, we've become conditioned. It's like we have this disease called jaundice, where we perceive things that are very sweet to be very bitter. But by taking the medicine of the holy name and by engaging in Krishna's service, we're actually able to purify the senses, we're able to purify the consciousness, and we're able to really taste the nectar which we're actually meant for. Because as Krishna is Satchidananda, so is the spirit soul. As part and parcel of Krishna, the spirit soul is also Sat-Chit Ananda. So the spirit soul is eternal, it's full of knowledge, and it's always blissful. So we're hankering for this eternally blissful condition, and the way in which we can actually taste that nectar is to engage all of our senses in the service of Krishna. And gradually one can taste that nectar by taking the medicine, right? It's not as the impersonalists say, which you just give up everything, right? Here in the translation, it describes merging with the Supreme. But this isn't merging as becoming one and giving up one's individuality. Because this individual consciousness that is present in the soul, it actually allows us to use our spiritual senses in the service of Krishna, by which one is actually able to get that eternal spiritual bliss. When one is diseased, it isn't that, okay, I have this disease, I'm just going to not do anything and I'll be cured. Right? Sure, you might be doing some bad things, you might have a horrible diet, you might be smoking, you might be drinking, but simply by stopping these activities, one might get some relief, one might stop the progression of his disease and stop it from getting worse, but some damage has already been done, right? It's like if one has a poor diet, this cholesterol, it'll make fatty deposits in one's arteries and in one's heart. And this causes the heart to have to work a lot harder to pump, which causes what's called myocarditis, which is basically where the heart muscle increases, which decreases the amount of blood that can pump. And the resistance is already higher, so it causes the heart to pump more and more and more. And eventually the heart gets overworked, and it stops working, it stops functioning. So just by stopping one's diet or stopping to eat, it might prevent the buildup of further plaque, but this plaque is already there. But by taking a specific medicine, one can actually break down that plaque and dissolve it so the heart can go back to its natural state and it can function at its natural condition. So we have to take the medicine, we have to take this medicine that's prescribed for us by our previous acharyas. And what is this medicine? One, it's chanting the holy name, chanting the names of Krishna. We have the Hare Krishna Mahamantra here, which is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, which one can properly engage the tongue, which by controlling the tongue, it's described, by starting with the tongue, it's natural for all the rest of the senses to be controlled. The tongue, it has two functions. It has the function to speak and also has the function to taste. So by starting with first this method of chanting, and also by taking prasadam, one can engage the tongue in the service of Krishna. And it isn't that we engage the senses in very miserable conditions, but actually taking prasadam and chanting the holy name of the Lord, they're very relishable activities. Right? Anyone here who's taken prasadam, which, I don't know, is it your first time here coming? Are you staying for breakfast?
Yes.
Good. You will really be able to experience what is the nectarian experience of taking Krishna prasadam, or engaging the tongue in honoring spiritual food, right? Srila Prabhupada describes here about the tongue engaging in tasting prasadam, which is remnants of foodstuff offered to the Lord. So, for one who's in a material condition, whenever they want to eat something, they prepare or they get whatever they want and think, I'm going to love eating this so much and it's really going to make me happy. But what we do that's different is that we cook everything for Krishna's pleasure and we offer it to him first with the consciousness of, while I might not be able to do so much, I can at least make this humble offering before the Lord and he can honor it, he can accept it, and I can honor the remnants and I can accept Krishna's mercy. And by Krishna honoring this prasadam, he actually makes the food spiritual. So with this spiritual food, it acts as medicine for our material body. And by constantly taking this spiritual food, we can actually spiritualize our consciousness too. So you're going to get firsthand experience of that in about, I think maybe like 40 minutes. So stay tuned. But this is where one starts. One starts with controlling the tongue, but one can actually engage all of his senses. It's described that, I believe this purport here that Srila Prabhupada is paraphrasing is from the section of Srimad Bhagavatam where it's describing Maharaj Ambarish, where it's described that Maharaj Ambarish, even though he was a great king with all material facility, he would engage his eyes in seeing the form of the Lord. He would engage his ears in hearing about the transcendental activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He would engage his body in cleaning the temple of the Lord. He would engage his legs in going to the various temples. So in this way, he would engage his whole life, 24 hours a day, in just serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And what's really amazing is that in the material world, one has to have specific situations for their senses to even get any material pleasure at all. Right? We don't say that the material world doesn't have any pleasure, but we say that the happiness and distress that comes with the material body, it comes and goes just like the changing of the winter and the summer seasons. And the happiness one can extract, it's almost like extracting water from like a dry sponge, right? Where the sponge, you might be able to extract some water out of it when it's very dry, but a sponge that's completely saturated, right, one can squeeze the full nectar out of it, right? But when one just engages the senses in the material activity, they need very specific situations, very specific circumstances for them to even get a little bit of happiness. But what's really amazing about engaging the senses in Krishna's service is that no matter what the external situation is that one is in, whether it materially might be a very dissatisfying circumstance, as long as the senses are engaged, one can actually experience this high level of transcendental spiritual bliss, right? I remember my spiritual master, His Holiness Bhakti Vikash Maharaj, when he first came to the temple, he thought, these people must be crazy. Why? Because their material situation is so suffering, is so dissatisfactory, yet they're the happiest people that I've ever met in my whole life. Like, what's going on here? Because as long as one's senses are engaged in the service of Krishna, one can become always happy, right? When this movement started here in America in the 60s, they had this slogan, because it was during the hippie era, they would say, "Stay high forever." And this was so important because the hippies, they would turn to drugs to get free from their material suffering, and they would get some high or some spiritual, not spiritual, but some satisfaction, some sense of happiness. But their main problem was, I get high, and then I have to come down. I have to come back to my suffering. So the devotees, they termed this slogan, "Stay high forever," because as long as one is engaged in the transcendental service of Krishna, one is actually able to stay at that high level of bliss as long as one is constantly engaged. Srila Prabhupada, he would often use this example of an iron rod, right? If one has fire and one has an iron rod, they're two completely different things, right? One couldn't possibly come to the conclusion, even if they break it down by the principles of Sankhya philosophy, that the iron rod and the fire are the same thing. They're completely different things. But when one puts the iron rod in the fire and it heats up, it becomes molten hot, where it exhibits the same qualities that is there by fire. And as long as you keep the iron rod in the fire, it stays red hot. And it has those same properties as fire. So by this example, as long as we're engaged in the transcendental service of Krishna, our qualities and our nature become just like that of Krishna. Like as was described in this verse of Brahma Samhita, Krishna is described, like I said, as Satchit Ananda, is as eternal, full of knowledge, and always blissful. And it isn't just by knowledge, though, that one comes to this platform. As Srila Prabhupada describes here, where is that? Anyway, Prabhupada describes somewhere here in the purport, talking about how, here it is, okay. In either case, activities of the senses in the material field are stopped by cultivation of knowledge, and if possible, they can be engaged in the service of the Lord. So the jnanis, by their platform of knowledge, they come to the understanding that we're similarly come to, that the material world is just a place of suffering and that we should come out of it. But like I was saying, they don't have any practical engagement for those senses. They don't have any engagement for that practical activity. And all of this that I'm describing here, it isn't something that I'm creating, but it's actually very elaborately described by Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. If you could pull up the 13th chapter, starting with text number 21, and I'll read a little bit here. For those who really want to read a lot into this and really understand, and you who are newly coming this chapter, it's like really, really awesome. All of the chapters are awesome, but specifically for one who has a lot of questions about the material world and how it works and what the soul is, this is a very interesting chapter. So here it describes nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. So I'll read the purport here. You can go back to the last one, sorry. I'll read the purport of the previous verse, Giri. Yeah, so you can. The Lord has described in the summary of the body, knowledge, and the knowable. The knowledge, hold on. This is 21 or this is 20? Is this 21? Yeah, okay. The different manifestations of the body and senses among the living entities are due to material nature. There are 18,400,000 different species of life, and these varieties are creations of the material nature. They arise from different sensual pleasures of the living entity, who thus desire to live in this body or that. When he is put into different bodies, he enjoys different kinds of happiness and distress. His material body and distress are due to his body and not himself as he is. In the original state, there is no doubt of enjoyment. Therefore, that is his real state. Because of the desire to lord it over material nature, he is in the material world. In the spiritual world, there is no such thing. The spiritual world is pure, but in the material world, everyone is struggling hard to acquire different kinds of pleasures of the body. It might be more clear to state that this body is the effect of the senses. The senses are the instruments for gratifying desire. Now, the sum total, body and instrument senses, are offered by material nature. And as will be clear in the next verse, the living entity is blessed or damned with circumstances according to his past desire and activity. According to one's desires and activities, material nature places one in various residential quarters. The being himself is the cause of his attaining such residential quarters, and his attendant enjoyment or suffering. Once placed in some particular kind of body, he comes under the control of material nature because of the body. Being matter, acts according to the laws of material nature. At that time, the living entity has no power to change that law. Suppose an entity is put into the body of a dog. As soon as he is put into the body of a dog, he must act like a dog. He cannot act otherwise. And if the living entity is put into the body of a hog, then he is forced to eat stool and act like a hog. Similarly, if the living entity is put into the body of a demigod, he must act according to his body. This is the law of nature. So this is, as I've been describing, this is the situation that we find ourselves in here. Right? Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita, Prakrite kriyamanani gunakarmani sarvashaha ahankara vimuratma kartahamiti manyate. That by this misconception of identifying the false ego or identifying this material body as the self, one is thinking himself to be the doer. But actually, the doer of all these material activities, it's the laws of nature themselves. So Krishna is describing here, in Prabhupada's elaborating on in this purport, as I was describing earlier, that the controller of this material body is actually the laws of nature. We're put into a particular body, we're given a particular circumstance here, and we're actually bound by the limitations of this material circumstance. Which is why when we try to unlimitedly enjoy, we only find limited capacity to do so. Right? We're only able to do so much with this material body. But when one engages his full activities in the service of Krishna, he actually spiritualizes all of this activity. And it's just like when one has a phone. All of us have a phone, and it has a battery, but the battery life is only very limited. It only lasts for a certain amount of time. But when one plugs his phone into the wall or plugs his phone into the power source, its power becomes unlimited. It never runs out of battery. So as long as we stay connected in Krishna's service, our level of enjoyment is actually unlimited, because Krishna, he's actually able to satisfy all those desires that we have. Us on our own, we aren't actually able to fully satisfy the senses. In the Bhagavad Gita, it describes that the senses, they're unsatiable and they burn like fire, right? A fire, for anyone who has experience, one starts a fire by putting a certain amount of wood in the fire, but it isn't like the fire says, okay, that's enough wood. one can keep putting more wood and more wood and more wood, and the fire will keep on accepting it. The fire will keep on burning more and more and more. So we have this unlimited desire, but in this material body and under the control of this material world, we only have very limited capacity to engage those senses, which is why we only have a certain amount of wood to put in that fire, and it stays unsatisfied. But the Supreme Lord, because He's unlimited, He's able to unlimitedly satisfy those unlimited desires, which is why, like Mahotsa Prabhu said, the most selfish thing to do is actually to selflessly serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because naturally, by serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all of these material desires that one has, all of the material distresses that one has, they're naturally satisfied. And not only are they satisfied, but one gets a higher spiritual taste. So it isn't just like how the Mayavadis say that you just make everything zero, but you're actually able to get that higher spiritual activity. So now I'll read the translation of these next two verses here, 22 and 23, because these also answer that question here that's posed by Vidura. It says, the living entity in the material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. And the next verse here says, yet in this body there is another transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the Supreme Proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, who is known as the Supersoul. So another point that Vidura was making here was he was saying that if the Lord is transcendentally situated in everyone's material body, how is it that that living entity experiences suffering if the Supreme Lord is always there with him? And in regards to this verse here, Srila Prabhupada would use this to make the analogy of the two birds in the tree, where if there's two birds in a tree and the tree has various different fruits, there's one bird that's tasting the fruits that are, made from the tree. And these fruits might be very sweet, they might be very bitter. And one bird, he's enjoying these fruits or suffering because of them, and the other bird, he's simply the observer, and he permits the other bird to engage in the tasting of these different fruits. So the Supreme Lord, he gives us this free will. He gives us the ability to choose to either serve him or serve the material nature. And those are really our only two options, because as parts and parcels, as actually infinitesimal spirit souls, as sparks, it's our nature to be servants. So one can either serve the material nature, one can either serve Maya, or one can serve Krishna. So Krishna, he gives us this option. He gives us this ability to choose. Why? Because Krishna wants us to love him, right? Even though Krishna is completely self-satisfied, even though Krishna doesn't need anything from us, he gives us the ability to love him, because in that position we become happy, we become completely satisfied. And thus the Lord, he's able to enjoy this, what is described here in the purport as transcendental variegatedness, right? This different flavors of rasa, this different tastes. So I encourage all of us, everybody, to try to engage their whole life, 24 hours a day, in service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And one way that's recommended is to distribute books, because in that way one is able to engage his full body, mind, and senses completely in serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I'll end my class here. Sorry I went a little over time. If there's any questions, comments, or corrections, we can discuss those now. Mahotsa Prabhu.
I was looking at the Sanskrit of this verse.
Mm-hmm.
If we can go back to
Which
it.
one?
See that, that Drashtratmani, that's a really Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur spoke a lot about that, understanding that the super soul is a seer, and we're the seen, and we can see and we can understand the whole point, and he would specifically speak about this as refuting the Mayavadi's conception that all Triputa Vinasha, which basically means that the destruction of the seer, seen, and the sight, the very object of vision. So this is a very important point, of our philosophy, and this word is very important, and it's written over there, and we can speak so much about that. But also another thing is Jiva Goswami in the Paramatma Sandarbha, he writes that the reason we feel refreshed after taking a good nap is because the soul comes in touch with the super soul. That's the closest the soul gets to the super soul in that state. So that's why when you get a good nap, you wake up feeling refreshed. It's just amazing. And anyway, a small thing is Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha Maharaj and O.B.L. Kapoor. What's his initiated name? O.B.L. Kapoor. Adikeshava Prabhu. They both actually wrote the commentary on Brahma Samhita, and they, and they during Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's time, they finished. They started it and they finished it after he disappeared. So they wrote it and they kept his name on it. But they would do that all the time. That they would just Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would write an article and keep O.B.L. Kapoor's name, and O.B.L. Kapoor would write an article and keep Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. It's really amazing. But they did that. That was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, to further glorify Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the first thing that I thought actually when I read through this verse in purport was like, wow, this is like, I mean, you like hear how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, spoke for like hours on just like one word. But just by reading through this verse, the first thing that I thought was this was like a class that he could easily speak on for like 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, because there's like so much packed in here, so that's like the first thing that I thought was like, I can definitely imagine seeing, a great personality giving a class on this for hours and hours and hours, because it's so deep, so yeah, that's amazing. Anybody else? What's your name, by the way? Sangirio?
Yeah, Sangirio.
Oh, that's a cool name.
All right, so the one question I have for you is, how has your life changed becoming Vaisnavas? Is that how you said?
Vaishnavas.
But yes, like how has your life changed becoming?
Where do I start?
Born a Vaishnava.
One can't be born a Vaishnava. They have to become one. But so I mean, I've really only been practicing this process of Krishna consciousness for a couple years, and like I was describing, for one who's sick, right, and when one starts to take medicine, even though one might be sick for such a long time, and they might think that, okay, this new condition, this is just my reality. When one actually starts to get cured, they really get to experience what life is really all about. So I would say literally every cell in my body has changed after taking to this process of Krishna consciousness, because it's completely unlike anything we can experience in the material sphere, right? People, they might recommend and try so many different things, and they might say, oh, you don't know how great this thing can be because you haven't tried it. But in your whole life, you can't try all these material things that people say can bring you happiness. But this Krishna consciousness, it's unlike any material thing that you can ever experience. Because like I was describing, it allows one to fully engage one's mind, body, words, and senses completely in service to God. Which is why we recommend this Krishna conscious process for everybody, right? It isn't just for a particular group of people, right? If you look at the room around you, there's such a diverse group of people. We have people from here in America, we have people all the way from Russia, we have people from so many different backgrounds and areas, and it's because the qualification isn't some material qualification for taking up to this process, But everyone as an individual spirit soul, they're all ultimately servants of God. And we recommend this process to everybody, whether they be Christians, Muslims, Hindus, because this allows one to fully engage one's body, mind, and senses in service to God. And not only that, but it allows one to become purified by that process also, which, like I said, it's really amazing, actually. And it's hard for those who are newly coming to Krishna consciousness to even consider that one can be happy with every single activity that they're engaged in their life, because they're doing everything not because, okay, this is going to make me happy, because I'm the enjoyer, but they're selflessly doing everything for the service of God. And by engaging in activity in that way, you'll find naturally you'll be very satisfied, you'll be very happy. That big void that's in everybody's heart that they're trying to fill with all these different small things, it becomes fully filled and it overflows also, which is why a good part of what we do is we try and share it with other people. Like if you had the cure to cancer, would you just keep it to yourself? No, you would.
No.
You would feel compassionate for everybody. You would see that everybody is suffering so much. And if I have the thing that can relieve their suffering, naturally you want to give it to them. So we're opening this facility freely for everybody to come. Everybody to engage full-time their mind, their body, and words completely in the service of God. So my life, it's changed completely because I've gone from being a materialistic, sense-gratifying, basically like a demon, right? I didn't have like horns, like pointy teeth or anything. But what's particularly described is this demoniac mentality, where the demons that are described in these Vedic literatures, oftentimes they're great kings, they might even be brahmanas. But their nature is that they think that they're the supreme. They think that they're the lord of everything that they survey, and they think that everything's meant for their enjoyment. So I basically changed from being like that and not finding any happiness in this material world to still being here in this material world and being fully self-satisfied, being fully blissful, fully happy, right? It isn't that you and I are existing in two different like dimensions or anything, and I'm like completely spiritual and I'm seeing like rainbows and like kaleidoscopes and like having some weird like spiritual acid trip or something. We're existing in the same world, it's just that I'm fully engaging my body, mind, and senses, or at least trying to, in the service of Krishna. And that's completely changing my outlook and perspective on life, because I'm not seeing as everything is for me, but I'm seeing everything as how can I use this in the service of Krishna. So it's completely changed my life for the better.
Wow, that's amazing, man. And like I was talking to him yesterday, I was telling him, I saw his videos of you guys on YouTube. The energy is amazing. Like, you guys are amazing. I just love the energy. And I was telling them, like, money can't buy your happiness, you know? Like, everybody looks for happiness outside of, you know, the source, whether it be money, fame, cars. Like, it doesn't, you know, it won't bring you happiness. It may be temporary, but it doesn't. You still have problems in your life that you're going through. So without the source, you're basically lost, if you think about it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can discuss more about these different spiritual topics while taking the spiritual food prasadam.
It sounds good.
Which,
What's the only question?
Oh, and another question, maybe a silly one, but how do you get better of like sitting cross like this? Because like literally after like I say 5 or 10 minutes, I'm sore. You know, like I'm numb, my feet is numb. I'm like, how do you guys do it? I don't know how you guys do it, but if you could give me some tips, that would be very great.
just like when one starts taking to the process of Krishna consciousness, it might be very difficult. Like it isn't like as soon as one starts taking the medicine, one becomes cured, right?
Right.
So, but by practice and by engaging in the activity, one naturally finds this as a natural position. I'm sure that all of us, when we first started to sit cross-legged, unless we were like 5, 6 years old, which it was very easy for us to even put like our feet in like behind our head and everything like that. But it's very, very difficult. So that's actually like a good analogy for our material experience. Now you're seeing all of us sitting cross-legged, and you're like, how are these guys doing it? Right?
I had to put my one leg, I couldn't hold it no more. I had to go like this.
But by practicing what we're doing, you can also sit
Next
cross-legged, and much more.
Right.
So we invite you to keep coming more often, and if you don't get anything out of it, you can at least say that I learned how to sit cross-legged. And that I got some cool spiritual food from the monks.
Right.
And some cool spiritual books too.
He works at the airport. He's
Oh, that's why.
he's cut.
got a lot of
Across, yeah.
Matsuji's, any questions? Anything? No? Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.